Chapter 10. The Wall Between Universes. When Houdini and Conan Doyle arrived at the hotel, they were greeted by a telegram from Lady Doyle. The inquest into Dr. Stratton's death had been completed, and the coroner determined that he had died of a heart attack in his sleep. Off record says likely had nightmare. Face contorted, fair, the telegram read. Be careful. They found that Eva had made a great deal of progress with the books, having stacked them on the bed neatly by category. They dated back as far as the 15th century, and none were more recent than 1868. While some were literary classics of eras past, such as Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress and works by Swift and Defoe, others were more sinister. These are histories of miracles and other events concerning the supernatural, including the Salem witch trials, Eva said, pointing to one stack. Those are grimoires, witches' spell books, books on demonology, including a reprint of the Malleus Maleficarum of 1487. Over here are treatises on the occult. Those are the books on metaphysics and physiotheology. This one is Faraway Worlds by Professor Jarvis Moreland.
My word! There are only 2 other copies of that in existence, exclaimed Conan Doyle.
Who? Houdini asked.
He was a forerunner of Madame Blavatsky and the theophysicists. He had some rather extraordinary theories about other dimensions.
I found some passages that might apply to our present investigation, Eva said. She cleared her throat and read aloud. The barrier between worlds is as thin as paper, and it is possible to poke a hole between them. She passed the book to Conan Doyle, the pages crumbling in his hand despite his care. In his booming voice, the author read, 2 universes are akin to 2 rooms in the same house, with a wall between them, through which only an occasional sound might pass. Yet one with mystical powers, like the gurus of India, might learn to pass through the walls. He lowered the book slowly. My God! The writer passed the thick tome to Houdini, whose lips moved as he silently reread the paragraph. And then there's this, the young woman said. She held up a little leather-bound black book. It was locked, but I used a hairpin, and you'll be proud of me, Harry. I popped it open.
Capital, my dear, Sir Arthur smiled, taking the book. Diary. Well, this should make for some interesting reading.
He frowned, removed his glasses, and, squinting, brought the book almost to his nose. The words were a mad jumble of hieroglyphics, but not Egyptian characters or Babylonian, or, he was quite certain, any other early language.
Hello. It's written in some kind of code. Presumably Mrs. Ralston didn't want anyone else to be able to read it. What the devil was that deranged harpy up to?
I think perhaps it's a journal she kept as she was doing it, Eva said. What she did to the house. Sir Arthur passed the black journal to Houdini. The magician scrutinized the book. He counted codes and invisible ink among his areas of expertise, but he could see at once it would take months to decipher it. I have some friends in the U.S. Secret Service, Houdini said. Perhaps one of their boys in the code-breaking department can make heads or tails of it. A magician pal of mine, Charlie Mendelson, is an ace at cracking them, too. He put the journal down and took another look at Faraway Worlds. One universe might be a heavenly domain full of light, he read. Another dimension may be like hell itself, a prison from which wretched souls, once having entered, may never escape. Houdini, fascinated, scanned the pages, turning them faster and faster, occasionally blurting out sentences, until he got to the end. Just before he closed the book, he saw something that made his brow furrow in bewilderment. Then he began to laugh, softly at first, then louder, until it bordered on an uncontrollable fit. Eva and Sir Arthur looked at each other, mystified. "Of course!" Houdini exclaimed, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes.
"Would you be so terribly kind as to share the joke with us?"
asked Sir Arthur rather grumpily. I'm going to drop by the house, Houdini said abruptly. He grabbed his hat and coat, stuffing the Moreland book in the pocket. You come along in about an hour, both of you. Care to give us even a hint? Eva said. No, but in the meantime, I want you to try something. Count the number of each symbol on the first page of the journal. The magician hurried out the door, leaving his companions' mouths agape. Chapter 10. Continued. An hour later, Conan Doyle and Eva arrived at the spook house in her Duesenberg. She clutched the crystal talisman dangling from her neck. Conan Doyle was not unarmed himself. In his coat pocket he had a small Bible, borrowed from the nightstand of his hotel room. He had not been a practicing Catholic in nearly 4 decades. Spiritualism was his religion now. But instinct warned him that to confront the powerful entity that lurked within the walls of the accursed place, a being that had swallowed so many souls, would require every weapon at his disposal. The driveway, hemmed in by those hideous, overgrown hedges, seemed to narrow as they approached the abandoned former inn. It felt as if they were being funneled toward the house, like unwitting rats driven to their doom. He turned to Eva. My dear girl, you've shown quite extraordinary pluck, but I must insist you stay in the car. I'm fearful for Houdini, and pray that nothing untoward has happened to him. You know he's courage incarnate, and I'm afraid he may have attempted something rash. If I find him, it's my duty to stand with him. We men must fight this thing shoulder to shoulder. Eva slowed down as the driveway curved to the front of the house. And you, Sir Arthur, are chivalry incarnate, she said. But this is the 20th century, and for better or worse, I'm a modern woman. I'll see this through to the end, and perhaps I'll find a way to redeem myself in your eyes. He shied and nodded grimly as they stopped at the waiting death house. To their surprise, they found Houdini sitting on the porch steps, calmly smoking a cigar. Beside him sat the caretaker Smalls, a shotgun across his knees. The old black man did not seem at all pleased to be there, and when he climbed to his feet out of respect for the approaching woman, he looked as if he might take the opportunity to hightail it back to his shack. Sir Arthur, this is Smalls, the former caretaker, Houdini said. He has agreed to do a small service for me. The old man took off his tattered hat and bowed. He looked nervously over his shoulder at the open door. I don't like messing with this place, he said, and pardon me, miss, but a lady don't belong in there neither. I just wants to go home. Keep your shirt on, Smalls, said the magician with a confident smile. Remember, there's $25 in this for you. There are no ghosts in that house, and I think I owe it to you to prove it to you. He pointed to Small's shotgun. You say you're pretty good with that thing? Yes, sir, boss. I can drop a raccoon 60 feet away if I has to. Good. Don't let anyone else come through that door until we come back. If they try to force their way in, plug 'em. And I mean colored or white, Smalls. The old man nodded emphatically and gripped his weapon as if it were a life-preserver. Yes, boss. Conan Doyle and Eva followed Houdini into the house, up the stairs, and to the gloomy corridor where they came to the trap door to the attic. Something you'll find interesting up here, Sir Arthur, Houdini said. I thought you said you inspected the attic, the puzzled Arthur replied. You're not still looking for secret passages at this stage of the game, are you? Humor me, Sir Arthur, Houdini said, opening the trap door and pulling down the ladder. He gestured for Conan Doyle to climb up. Sir Arthur, take a look, the magician said. He reached into his pocket and produced a small rubber ball. Oh, and you might want to take this. The author, adopting a skeptical look, scaled the ladder and poked his head through the opening to the attic. All he saw was the 4 walls of the enormous attic, with spider-webs crisscrossing its tremendous oak beams. At each end was a window. Well, it's as gloomy as a cemetery, which matches the decor of the rest of the place quite perfectly. Really, Harry, what's all this about? Look at the windows. The magician's voice came from below. Which one? Ah! The writer squinted at the window to his right, many yards away. Then he turned to the one at his left. No difference between them, both small and cracked. He looked back and forth at them again, and then he saw it. The Y-shaped crack was in the very same place on both windows, in the lower right corner.
"It's not possible,"
he gasped. He took the rubber ball and tossed it at the window to his right. There came the unmistakable sound of the ball hitting glass, and it bounced back to him. Expert cricketer that he was, Conan Doyle had no trouble catching it, but he almost stumbled off the ladder in surprise, because the ball hadn't struck the window. It had struck something in between, about 16 feet away.
"Good Lord! The hidden room! Is it behind it?"
"You've got it, Sir Arthur. All done with mirrors." The visitor from England climbed up the ladder, followed by Houdini and Eva. They approached the mirror. Conan Doyle rapped on the glass.
"If we were to smash this mirror—"
"We'll find the hidden room, and you can bet your bottom dollar a generator, too," nodded Houdini, "and an apparatus to lower it to the space below, the ballroom."
"Well, at the risk of 7 years' bad luck, I'm inclined to do that right now."
He picked up one of the old tennis rackets and brushed away the spider webs.
"I take a dim view of being made a perfect fool of."
He raised the instrument. "Hold off practicing your serve for a minute, Sir Arthur. I think I found the control for the elevator right here." Attached to one rafter was a rusted metal ring which, although innocuous in appearance, served no obvious purpose. Houdini yanked it. Suddenly they could hear a loud grinding noise on the other side of the mirror. The floor beneath them began to vibrate. "Is that the hidden room descending into the ballroom?" Eva marveled. The magician nodded, grinning like the cat that ate the canary. Sir Arthur took a close look at the metal control switch and shook his head in disbelief.
"It's like something out of a picture show. I half expect to see a sinister hunchback limp by."
"Shall we go down and take a look-see?" Houdini said jauntily. As they descended the stairs to the ground floor, Conan Doyle was torn between relief and disappointment.
"I'm pleased that we're not sitting on the border between our world and some hellish realm. But it's hard to fathom I could have been so thoroughly hoodwinked."
"Well, I was halfway sold on the breaching the walls between dimensions bit, too, until I took a close look at the Morland book." He handed Sir Arthur the book. "Look in the back." The author examined the inside back cover, where words were stamped.
"Sold by Holden Brothers, fine books, in 1918. But 1918 is decades after the death of Mrs. Ralston, who supposedly owned it. Good heavens, we were meant to find that trunk."
"Yes, and all the mumbo-jumbo in it," said Houdini as they reached the bottom of the stairs. "By the way, what did you find when you counted the characters in the diary?" "Nothing at all," said Eva. "There were about the same number of each symbol." "Which tells you—"
Conan Doyle clapped his forehead. "By Jove, it can't be a real cipher at all. There'd be more E's than Z's, more T's than Q's, for heaven's sakes. We were supposed to drive ourselves mad puzzling over that purported journal when it contains nothing more than gibberish. Somebody's been having a good deal of fun at our expense. Brilliant, Harry."
"Elementary, my dear Sir Arthur," Houdini said, glowing with pride. They headed down the hall to the ballroom, or rather, where it had stood empty only a few minutes before. "Why did you leave Smalls to guard the door?" Eva said. "You don't think the room's been going up and down by itself, do you?" The magician replied.
"The madman, Langdon?"
said Sir Arthur. "A pretty safe bet. He's a trained architect, remember? A guy like that would have the know-how to design all this." Sir Arthur snapped his fingers.
"My word, I think you've got it. He made the renovations to the house soon after old Randolph gave it to him as a wedding gift, remember?"
The three of them approached the doorway where the ballroom had been. In place of the ordinary door was another door, the gruesome entrance bearing faces Dr. Stratton had described. The faces, carved into the wood, Male, female, old, young, did indeed look like tortured souls crowded together in the inferno.
"I think it's best that you remain here,"
Houdini said. "This is not a sight for a lady." "Certainly not," the young woman replied emphatically, folding her arms like a spoiled child. "Now look here, sister," the magician growled, but Conan Doyle shushed him.
"I've been down that road to no avail, Harry. Let her come."
"Very well." He retrieved a chair Reverend Lassiter had left behind and held it while, with the other hand, he turned the brass door handle. The door glided open as silently as a snake slithering through grass. The trio entered the room as Houdini placed the chair in the doorway, carefully propping the door open. It was cramped, with the appearance of a bunker more than a dining room. A long dinner table stood in the middle, a single light bulb hanging over it, casting a stark, garish light. There were a dozen chairs, 8 of which were occupied by wizened, mummified corpses. 5 others, including a pair of men sprawled on their backs, were near the walls. Eva screamed and looked as if she might faint, but Sir Arthur, who'd had the foresight to stand near, steadied her. She stood back as he and Houdini grimly examined the remains. The corpses appeared to have been coated with a hard, transparent material, giving them the look of figures in a wax museum.
"What is that ghastly stuff?"
"A kind of organic polymer to preserve them, I guess."
"Keeping trophies. This goes beyond madness."
All the figures were bony and hollow-cheeked, suggesting death by starvation. 2 of the victims on the floor were dark-skinned and clad in overalls. Presumably these were the workers who'd vanished. At the head of the table sat a man with a mop of white hair, matching descriptions of Judge Parker. In another seat was a middle-aged, bearded man. On his hand, which rested on the table, was a ring that bore 3 bears. "The Langdon family crest," said Houdini.
"The missing cousin?"
"No," said Eva. "I think I found him over here." The men turned and were surprised to see Eva crouched beside 2 figures nestled in a corner in a perpetual embrace. They appeared to have been in their 20s when death claimed them. Their youth was frozen in time. One was female, clad in a dress fashionable a decade earlier. She'd been attractive, if her bone structure was any indication. An engagement ring graced her left hand.
"Donald, the cousin Paul Langdon told us about," Conan Doyle surmised. "And the missing girl, Daisy. So they were sweethearts after all."
Houdini wrenched a scrap of paper from the young man's hand and quickly scanned the words scrawled in pencil. "I was to ask for her hand next month at the lake where we met. Please bury us together. I pray God considers us married in his eyes." Eva began to weep. "How perfectly dreadful." Conan Doyle put an arm around her shoulder.
"Love gave them solace and courage at the end, I expect. You see,"
the great author was interrupted by an unwelcome noise, the door slamming shut.
"Harry, the door!"
Houdini leaped with blinding speed toward the door, but it was locked tight, with no handle on the inside. "But the caretaker, what happened?" Eva cried. "Langdon must have overpowered him," said Houdini. The 3 looked about the prison in which 13 others had perished, slowly and horribly. They felt a vibration as the room began to rise once again to its hiding place.
"Then we find ourselves in something of a pickle," Conan Doyle said grimly.
Chapter 11. The Chamber of Horrors. Houdini meticulously examined every inch of the room. The door, as they knew all too well, had neither a handle, keyhole, nor hinges on the inside. The walls were solid steel behind the plaster, the escape artist discovered after prying off a chair leg and bashing the surface. High on a wall facing the door was a tiny grate measuring no more than 4 inches wide through which air flowed. Apparently their captor didn't intend his subjects to suffocate. A narrow pipe projected from one wall. Water dripped from it, presumably so thirst didn't claim the victims too soon. On the floor was another grate, about 6 inches wide, which their host had graciously supplied for eliminating bodily waste. After close to an hour, tapping a wall with a chair leg, Houdini exclaimed, "Ah, ha! Here it is!" He bashed at the wall at eye level until the plaster gave way. Even Conan Doyle drew close beside him. The magician had discovered a small, square opening in the steel. No more than 4 inches wide, however, it presented no avenue of escape. "What do you suppose it is?" asked Eva. "A spy hole through which we can be seen," Houdini said. "Look, you can see the reflection of a fisheye lens a foot away. He can see the entire room. He's watching us like bugs in an ant farm."
"For what possible purpose?" said Conan Doyle, bending to look at the peephole.
"Because he is a sadist," said Eva, with a bitter, sorrowful look. "I've met such men in my younger days. My former husband, as a matter of fact. Soon after our first anniversary, I learned that he had a habit of whipping prostitutes." A paragon of robust sexual normality, Conan Doyle could not conceive of a man who drew perverse pleasure from the suffering of others. He'd heard of Desaad, of course, but had always assumed it was poppycock, scribbled to titillate armchair debauchers. And yet, thinking back to his school days, there were certainly teachers who took an unseemly delight in the application of the birch, or worse, the grolly, a piece of India rubber the size of a thick boot, delivered on the palm of the student's hand. The maximum punishment, 9 blows on each hand, caused one's flesh to swell, turn purple, and remain so painful one couldn't even turn a doorknob. His mind went back to a poem he'd written as a schoolboy about a student enduring a sleepless night as he lay in anticipation of a beating the following morning. How did it go again? He thought of the birch's stinging stroke, and thought with fear on the morrow. He wriggled and tumbled and nearly awoke, and again he sighed with sorrow. Now Sir Arthur pictured the unwholesome lair playing about the headmaster's lips as he patted the grolly just before the first blow. Was their captor on the other side of the wall, wearing such a hideous grin?
"It's the sense of power over others that such men crave, I suppose."
Eva nodded. "Yes, just as the feeling of helplessness that makes this so terrifying for the 3 of us." "We're not helpless," declared Houdini. "It's time to put that bulk of yours to use, Sir Arthur." He threw off his coat, marched to the door, and positioned himself like a football player waiting to hear hike.
"Break the door down?"
Conan Doyle said in surprise. "You have a better idea?"
"No, but I'm rather surprised you would resort to brute force."
"At this point, Sir Arthur, I would resort to screaming for help like a frightened old woman if I wasn't sure the room was soundproofed."
Shoulder to shoulder, they rammed the door. It failed to give after 3 mighty blows that would put a medieval battering ram to shame.
Exhausted, the men sat on the table. 3 chairs remained unoccupied, but no one felt inclined to take a place among the other guests. Houdini closed his eyes like a Calcutta Swami, drumming his fingers on the table. The others watched him uneasily. After a few minutes, the magician stood. "Eva, may I borrow that hairpin?" "But there's no lock to pick, Harry." "Humor me." She plucked the pin out of her bun, and her long blonde curls cascaded down. It was the sort of display a film actress might put on to reveal a homely librarian's hidden beauty, Conan Doyle thought. "And Sir Arthur, your wire reading glasses, if you wouldn't mind," the magician said, resting the long pin on the table.
"Most certainly,"
the author replied, eagerly obliging. He thought, "At last our man has a scheme up his sleeve." Houdini popped out the lenses from Conan Doyle's spectacles and began to wind the wire around the pin. "Hope you don't mind," Houdini said. "I'll buy you a new pair when we get out of here."
Well, I must admit I'm at a loss, old chap. What the dickens are you up to?"
Houdini held up the makeshift device under the bare light bulb that hung over the table. "The electricity from the socket. I'm making an electromagnet." Sir Arthur beamed.
"You really are a genius. Capital idea."
Houdini took a glove from his coat pocket, climbed on the table, and unscrewed the light bulb. The bulb squeaked like a mouse as he turned it. Soon the light flickered, and the room was cast into darkness. Although the ghastly corpses vanished, the overall effect was to increase the chamber's oppressiveness. Eva shuddered. The dark had always been her element, the theater in which she worked her magic, but now she felt smothered by blackness.
"Careful, old man. Electrocute yourself, and the two of us are done for. We shan't be able to come up with anything so clever."
"We'll know if it's clever when I don't turn into a pile of ashes." Sparks flew overhead.
"Ouch!"
Houdini cried.
"Well, that smarted."
The lights came back on, with the light bulb back in place. Houdini sat on the table, smoke coming from the glove and a hole at the fingertip. "Did it work?" Eva said anxiously. "We shall see." Houdini pulled off his belt and brought the hairpin close to the buckle. Sure enough, the magnetized pin clung to the metal. "Now what?" said Eva anxiously. "I'm going to use the magnet to manipulate the lock through the door."
"Good show, Harry!"
Sir Arthur cried heartily. Houdini knelt before the door and placed the hairpin against it, in the general vicinity of where he figured the door handle was on the other side. Eva glanced at Conan Doyle, who gave her a confident wink. After 45 minutes of moving the magnet in every conceivable direction, Houdini sighed and stood up. "Here's your pin, Eva. But keep your hair down. You don't look half bad with it that way." "It didn't work," she sighed. "I'm afraid not." Houdini took his place in one of the empty chairs, stroking his chin. Eva began to pace, the rate of her breathing steadily increasing. She stood under the air vent. "You're quite sure there's air?" she said, toying with the blackened talisman that hung around her neck. "Don't the two of you find it growing stuffy?" For the first time, panic was entering her voice. Conan Doyle thought,
"The girl's shown a remarkable spunk up to now. An ordinary woman would have succumbed to hysteria hours ago, perhaps even Jean."
He walked to the corner and put a comforting arm around her.
"Have no fear, my dear. Houdini has escaped from sealed mail-bags, from a coffin buried under sand, from a diving suit. This will be a small matter to him once he's had a bit of time to think it through."
Eva nodded and leaned against the wall. Chapter 11. Continued. After a moment, Conan Doyle strode over to the escape artist.
"Well, Houdini, what's your plan?" he said with gusto. "The last one was a doozy, I must say."
Houdini, staring straight ahead, whispered with airy calm, "Are you a religious man, Sir Arthur?"
"You know quite well I've devoted myself to nothing else for a decade."
"I don't mean hocus pocus, the real thing."
Houdini pointed up.
"Him."
"I'll ignore that jab under the circumstances. What are you suggesting?"
"I'm suggesting that we pray. We prepare ourselves." It took a moment for the magician's words to sink in.
"But surely you, the great Houdini—"
"Is a fake, a fraud. Almost every handcuff I've ever gotten out of, I had a key that would open it, hidden in a compartment in my cabinet, or a knife to cut ropes. It's flim-flam, misdirection. Do you really think a man can escape from an impossible situation? No, because it's impossible." Conan Doyle sat quietly beside him.
"I see. Well, that puts a damper on things."
He thought back to the very first story he'd ever written, the very first lesson about the craft he'd learned. At the age of 4, he wrote a 36-word story about a hunter facing a Bengal tiger, armed only with a knife and his courage. The tiger had a very satisfying meal. He recalled having remarked to his mother that it's very easy to get people into scrapes, but not so easy to get them out again. Now he and his friends were in a scrape he himself might have written, painting himself handsomely into a corner. It was a dismal thought, but the author wasn't one to wallow in depression. He thought, didn't Poe save his hero from a premature burial, and another unlucky chap from a razor-sharp pendulum? It's merely a matter of thinking unconventionally. Yes, that's the ticket.
Houdini, I implore you now, he said firmly, put aside any fear of discovery. Upon my honor, I assure you I will not divulge your secret to anyone, even though I believe the public would greatly benefit from such knowledge. You must use your powers now to pass through the wall.
Houdini looked at him and laughed bitterly. Sir Arthur, as the most famous writer in Britain, I think you should understand plain English. I have no supernatural powers. None. Conan Doyle shook his head. You've escaped from a sealed milk can, from a block of ice. With my own eyes I watched you stroll out of a safe you'd never laid eyes on before. Why are you being so obdurate? Obdurate? It means— I know what it means, Houdini said angrily. I've explored every inch of this room, and there's no way out. Not for you, and not for me. Sir Arthur looked crestfallen.
I refuse to believe it.
On the ship, you waltzed out of that wooden room after I and the others searched it with a fine-tooth comb. Houdini sighed. That was a cinch. How many volunteers searched the room?
8 of us, I believe.
And how many came out?
Well, 8, obviously.
Did you count them?
Of course not.
7. The 8th guy was an accomplice. My assistant stood behind the door when it swung inside, stayed, and freed me in 2 minutes. No one else bothered to count the solid citizens either. Conan Doyle replayed the scene in his head. Yes, he could see now how it could have been done. But that couldn't explain everything.
How did you walk through a brick wall? He demanded.
A brick wall built on stage in front of an audience of thousands with mortar. The audience saw you walk from one side and then reappear on the other. The only way possible, under it, through a trap door in the floor. But there was a carpet under the wall, covering the stage with men standing on it. The rug sagged, and no one felt it? Nonsense! And when a stone wall was built on a platform, a foot off the floor, encasing you entirely, even the roof,
did you go under it then?
No, Houdini explained wearily. A false stone, a plaster one I could punch through, with tools inside to patch it after I climbed through the hole.
Poppycock! The space would be too small to wriggle through. No man with the capacity to reason would accept that explanation. And while we're on the subject, how did you make a full-grown African elephant vanish without resorting to preternatural means? Come, man. The time for denial is far past.
I'm not going to sit here explaining my tricks to you one by one as we starve, Houdini snapped. They're tricks. That's all you need to know. Nothing I have ever encountered or experienced has convinced me that anyone has supernatural powers.
You misspeak, surely.
I don't think so, the magician said heatedly. I've been neck-deep in mystery all my life, and I've yet to see a mystery I cannot fully explain.
Have you forgotten?
I haven't forgotten a damn thing, Houdini snarled, rising to his feet.
Houdini, you cannot stand here and deny what you saw, what you felt when you read the letter from your mother that Lady Doyle produced through automatic writing.
What I felt was pure disgust. My sainted mother was a Hungarian immigrant who couldn't get out a straight sentence in English. But your wife had her writing in perfect English, blathering on in those awful platitudes, every word pure pablum. Conan Doyle's eyes widened in surprise. Then he shook his head.
I saw you react as you read the letter, he insisted. The expression on your face as you became aware of the presence of your mother.
You see what you wish to see, Sir Arthur.
Rubbish! In the spirit world, one has eons to educate and improve oneself, to learn. Picking up a new language would be child's play.
And was she converted to Christianity as well? The sign of the cross Lady Doyle reverently drew on the top of the page? My mother was a devout Jew, for crying out loud. That stumps Arthur, at least for the moment. Surely you believe the soul survives death, Houdini. I know you have loved ones who've passed. Yes, I think there's a heaven, but not the one you believe in. You think you'll smoke cigars, snack on hors d'oeuvres in a country club in the sky, and play cricket with the Almighty.
I would never stoop to mocking your religion, Harry, Conan Doyle said, growing angry now. I thank you not to mock mine.
Fine. Just don't ask me to sing from your hymnal. I've been looking for proof of the supernatural for 15 years, and I haven't scrounged up one iota. There are only 4 kinds of mediums, Doyle. Honestly deluded, psychotics, publicity hounds, and criminals. Mrs. C will be happy to tell you into which category she falls. Eva bowed her head.
You know the purity of my wife's mediumship,
Conan Doyle insisted.
I saw the effect on you, the faraway look in your eye.
Houdini exploded. For the love of God, wake up, Doyle. It was baloney. While you were mooning over that stupid letter like a schoolgirl reading her first love note, Bess talked to me through sign language from her old mind-reading act. She said your wife pumped her for information about my mother before she did her little number. Sir Arthur stood.
I must ask you to tread lightly now, Houdini, he said in a low voice. You are implying that Lady Doyle was deliberately being deceptive.
Like I said, I've only met 4 types of mediums, the magician said, folding his arms.
Well, out with it, Conan Doyle rumbled. You're the manly sort. Exactly what type is it you wish to say Lady Doyle is?
Houdini walked up to the bigger man and looked him dead in the eye. She's the type who would pursue a wealthy and famous man while his wife is dying of tuberculosis, he said acidly. The type who'd then fill his head with horse manure about having mystical powers. A female Svengeli type, I guess you'd say, who'd lead the poor dupe by the nose so she could be lady of a big house and queen of a dandy cult. That type. Conan Doyle turned a deep shade of red.
You insult my religion, and that is merely a sign of poor breeding. But now you make insinuations regarding my wife's honor. I must ask you to retract your words, sir.
Houdini went on as if he hadn't heard. The only question that remains is in what other ways the lovely lady is deceiving an elderly husband. Conan Doyle began tearing off his jacket.
You can stop chattering now. You've more than adequately earned a thumping.
Apologize, Harry, Eva begged as Sir Arthur placed his jacket over a chair. Oh, sure, Houdini said. I'm sorry that I didn't tell you earlier that your wife is a fraud. My spies put together the whole picture. How, as your first wife wasted away at home of consumption, you squired this opera singer around town. How long did that go on? 10 years, I believe? Sir Arthur's broad face was purple now. Eva feared he might have a heart attack. Of course, this courtship was chaste, so you saw nothing wrong in it, Houdini railed, talking faster and faster. That doesn't surprise me. You see what you want to see. What you don't want to see is invisible to you. Conan Doyle's innards boiled with fury. He and Jean had exercised such discretion. He'd struggled to keep their relationship pure and spare Jean's reputation, while poor Tui dragged herself with excruciating deliberation to her grave, all of modern science unable to defeat the evil microscopic bug that ate away at her and made love-making an impossibility. He thought, I never gave her a moment's unhappiness or pain. I paid a fortune and would have given every shilling I owned to save her from that. How dare this crude American clown, who knows nothing about my first love, speak of her?
You blackguard, he roared, charging forward. You vile little pygmy. You pompous, strutting peacock.
Houdini put up his dukes.
That's it. Defend yourself.
Houdini ducked Conan Doyle's first swing at him, but with the next blow the enormous Scot bashed him in the face with a fist the size of a ham hock. Houdini staggered back, holding his nose. He began to dance around the room, ducking Sir Arthur's blows, which came at him like the arms of a windmill. Conan Doyle was an aficionado of boxing and remarkably fit. A lifetime of sport gave him muscle and coordination in addition to his bulk. He'd brawled as a lad at primary school and learned the Queensberry rules at university. He'd earned the respect of the crew of the Arctic whaler when he flattened the drunken steward with a tremendous right hook, and he'd sharpened his skills studying boxing for his play The House of Temperley, a melodrama of the ring. In short, though he was much older than the lithe, athletic Houdini, he was far from a pushover. Houdini was surprised at how the 63-year-old could block his rapid-fire punches with those big fists. One good slug from that big British bear could break my jaw, he thought. Chapter 12. The Great Beyond. Sir Arthur reached over the table and dimmed the light bulb. There was no risk of the room looking any spookier. The three captives held hands. Sir Arthur's grip, always strong, was so powerful Houdini felt the bones in his hand might break. He wasn't sure if that reflected the author's residue of anger at him or simply tension. They sat in the twilight in complete silence for several minutes. "You feel nothing," Sir Arthur whispered. "Perhaps this was a mistake," Eva said. "I've given you false hope." "No, concentrate. Keep your chin up. That's a good girl." Another 10 minutes passed. Houdini's face dropped into his hands, and he sighed. "The hunger must be driving me nuts," he thought. "Why did I let these jokers talk me into this?" "Someone is here," Eva said abruptly. Conan Doyle could feel it too. He could see nothing, and yet there was no denying a presence. Eva inhaled suddenly. It was that startling sound again, as if she'd been entered. Her jaw dropped, and a masculine voice spoke. "Bonjour, mon ami." "Who are you?" demanded Houdini. "An old friend," the response came, in English now. The French-accented voice was so deep it was difficult to believe that it issued from the petite woman's voice-box. "Please be kind enough to identify yourself," Sir Arthur said gently. "Houdini knows me." The magician leaned forward. "An old friend. I have a lot of friends who've passed away." "You stole my name." "Robert Houdin," gasped Houdini. Robert Houdin, his boyhood idol. Robert Houdin, who had performed before kings and dazzled scientists nearly a century ago. Robert Houdin, whose legacy he had so expertly discredited. "The magician," Conan Doyle said. Houdini nodded. He stared at Eva's face, now transformed into a sardonic mask. "If you truly are the spirit of Robert Houdin, you'll be able to answer a simple question," he said. "How did you do the crystal water casket trick?" The only response was laughter. "You dare to challenge me, your mentor?" "Houdini, we don't have time for this," Conan Doyle groaned. "This isn't one of your investigations. For God's sake, man, see if you can help us." "No, please, let the great Houdini go on," their guest said with mild amusement. "He knows everything there is to know about me. You visited my grave and held your hat in your hand, weeping. So moving." "This is remarkable," Houdini said, sitting back in bewilderment. He'd been alone in the cemetery that day. "Sir, we need your help. Are you aware of our predicament?" A more sinister laugh now. It seemed to come not only from Eva, but from all directions. "Why should I help you, Houdini? You have devoted yourself to smearing me. You took my name as your own. But when the time came to glorify yourself at my expense, you betrayed me. You accused me of stealing credit for the inventions of others. The basest lie ever spoken.
You said I should be uncrowned as the king of conjurers and known as the prince of pilferers. My little biography? I only sought to restore you to your proper place in the history of magicians, Houdini protested weakly. And you must admit you took credit unfairly. Shush, Conan Doyle whispered. Again a laugh, a cruel one. You have the gall to make that charge, Houdini. You, who have stopped at nothing to crush your competitors. How many men have you destroyed? How many careers have you ruined so that you may stand alone as the greatest magician of all time? Houdini bristled. Ridiculous! An artist must deal with rivals with a certain ruthlessness. It's the same as in any business. Would you have the head of Standard Oil give his technique for refining oil to his competitors? He felt Sir Arthur's knee nudge his under the table. Arguing with a disembodied spirit about the merits of vertical monopolies was a bit ridiculous under the circumstances, Houdini realized. He swallowed his pride. Forgive me. I've indeed slighted you. If I have the honor of some day meeting you in the afterlife, I will apologize in person. What advice can you give us? You steal my greatest mystery, the crystal water casket, and bask in the adulation of the audience. And now you have the audacity to ask for my help, the help of the spiritual father whose reputation you have stained and dishonored, to beg pitifully for a bit longer on the mortal coil. Houdini clasped his hands and leaned forward. Yes, I dare to beg, if not for Houdini, at least for the sake of these two innocents. Malicious laughter echoed off the walls. Oh, the brave and selfless Houdini! He thinks only of others, the voice said imperiously. Harry Houdini, handcuff king, misty-arch, matinee idol. The door to this room will never open until the moment he who imprisoned you here chooses. Sir Arthur protested. But surely... And you, Sir Arthur, will be still as stone. See all of you soon. Au revoir. Chapter 13. An Experiment in Teleportation. Houdini screwed in the light bulb, and harsh light filled the room. Eva was still shaking off her trance. The medium brushed her curly locks out of her face. What happened? I felt a presence. If that was a gag, it wasn't very funny, Houdini said sternly. Eva shook her head emphatically. I swear to you. Damn it all, man, Sir Arthur jumped in. Is a woman's word of honor at the point of death not good enough for you? Houdini sighed and slumped to the floor, leaning against the door. I believe she believes it, yes. But whether that voice came from the great beyond or from deep within her own subconscious doesn't matter. It's the truth. Sir Arthur sat on the table and nodded. Old man, it appears we shall have the answer to all our questions very soon. We will continue our debate about the supernatural on the other side. 4 days passed, according to Conan Doyle's pocket watch. The three captives sipped from the water pipe, which surrendered its intermittent drops in a maddeningly miserly manner. Hunger gnawed at them. Conan Doyle and Eva slept on the floor uneasily. Her head was on his chest, and she wept in her fitful sleep. The writer drifted in and out of consciousness. But Houdini, who required only 4 hours of rest nightly, even under ordinary circumstances, didn't sleep at all. Each time Conan Doyle opened his eyes, he saw the magician pacing back and forth, faster and more furiously at every step, tugging his hair with both hands, thinking. Sir Arthur had the sense he'd gone mad, either from hunger or the extremity of the situation. He thought, Houdini is brave, but I've seen war heroes crack under less hopeless scenarios than this. Steady, old man, the Scotsman said. We've got to keep our heads, for the girl's sake. Let's show this cowardly peeping Tom what we're made of by meeting our fate with dignity."
"It's not my fate to die here, or yours either," Houdini said, shaking a finger at the rider.
"But Robert Houdin—"
"I don't take that son of a bitch's word as gospel. Even if all that was real, he's a ghost, not God." He began snapping his fingers as if he were onto something. Then a smile began to play upon his lips.
"Have you thought of something?"
"Have I ever?"
"Good show, old boy. I knew you had it in you," the rider said, his optimism returning.
"Wake Eva." Sir Arthur roused the young woman, bedraggled now with unwashed clothing askew, hair dangling over her forehead, and tears staining her powdered face. "Have you ever heard of the 18th-century magician Catafelto?" Houdini asked his companions. They shook their heads. "He was quite a character. He baffled audiences in London by making a cat's tail vanish and reappear before their eyes, and used devices like sulphur matches decades before their invention was ever reported. Now, here's the interesting thing. He did a trick in which he went up to the front of the Tower of London, and in full view of the audience, he dematerialized. A few minutes later, he showed up on the other side of the building."
"What was the trick?"
"According to his notebooks, which I acquired for my library at tremendous expense, it was no trick," Houdini replied. "He claimed that by concentrating intensely, he could pass through solid stone. According to Catafelto, the real illusion is the world we see and hear. The underlying nature of reality is quite different. Location is an illusion, and by force of will, one can ignore it."
Sir Arthur perked up. "This is fascinating. When we get out of this, I really must read up on the chap. So you admit, finally, that this is how you've achieved some of your feats, through dematerialization?"
"To the contrary, I've never done it. But today, I will. I am going to walk through that wall, and I'm going to get help." He turned to Eva. "And, ma'am, I promise you we'll get out of here safely."
"Bravo!"
Sir Arthur exclaimed, jumping to his feet.
"That's the fighting spirit, lad."
He punched the magician's shoulder playfully, as if he'd forgotten all the harsh words and real blows they'd recently traded. His gift for expelling unpleasant memories came in handy on such occasions.
"How may the two of us assist you?"
"According to Catafelto's notes, it's vital that all distractions be removed. We must turn out the lights completely, and you have to sit in utter silence. You must reinforce my will with your own, and concentrate on a single thought. Location is an illusion." He gave the author his most penetrating stare. "Sir Arthur, when I vanish, it's important that you keep your head, no matter what happens. You may see me stuck halfway, or take in some grisly sight. You must be prepared to act." The author looked deeply into the magician's eyes and nodded solemnly. As Houdini strode toward the wall, Eva grabbed his arm. "Harry, it's too dangerous. Getting stuck in the wall isn't the worst thing that could happen. You might never materialize at all, or find yourself in some hellish other world." Houdini stroked her yellow hair and gave a confident smile. "Don't worry, sister. This world hasn't seen the last of Houdini yet." Conan Doyle drew the young woman away. Houdini faced the wall, gazed at it intently, and placed both hands on it, splaying his fingers. "Sir Arthur, when you are ready, douse the lights." The author leaned over the table and unscrewed the light bulb, again casting them into complete darkness. Eva stood beside him and cleared her mind except for a single thought, upon which she focused with blazing intensity. Location is an illusion. Location is an illusion. Location is an illusion. All that could be heard was the monotonous sound of water dripping with the regularity of a grandfather clock. Drip, drip, drip. After a moment, they heard Houdini grunt in frustration. Every time I feel something is happening, I remember where I am, right here, nowhere else.
Concentrate, man. Our lives depend on it, Sir Arthur said firmly. Nothing is impossible. You are the great Houdini. No prison can hold you.
Several moments of silence passed.
Houdini!
Houdini? The writer called out tentatively. There was no reply.
Houdini! Are you there?
Do you think? Eva said hopefully. Sir Arthur groped in the dark for the table, clambered onto it, and twisted the bulb back into position. When the light came back on, the two saw that where Houdini had stood at the wall, his clothes lay on the floor. Sir Arthur picked up the trousers. He looked around the room. He bent and looked under the table, an incredulous expression on his face.
"By Jove! The marvelous little devil did it!"
he exclaimed in delight. Eva embraced him joyfully. "Then we're saved!" Conan Doyle nodded.
"Even now he's outside the house, walking down the road, flagging down a car, I expect."
She took the pants from his hands. "Hopefully he'll have found a clothesline with some long johns hanging from it."
Sir Arthur laughed merrily. "At this point I am sure he'd settle for an old lady's bloomers."
Suddenly Eva looked fearful. "What's that?" she cried.
"What, my dear girl?"
"That sound." The writer listened, and now became aware of an insidious hiss. It was coming from the vent. Sir Arthur blanched.
"Gas."
The word instilled terror in anyone alive. Mustard gas was the most grotesque instrument of death introduced to soldiers in the Great War.
"Why?"
Eva asked, covering her mouth in dread.
"Our captor has decided to exterminate us. Then I imagine he'll give chase after Houdini to murder him."
"I thought he meant to starve us," Eva said, backing away from the vent.
"Apparently he keeps gas in store for those he chooses to dispatch quickly."
He stuffed Houdini's shirt into the grate, trying to block the fumes, but this was to no avail. In a matter of minutes, both felt themselves growing faint. They took their seats beside the other occupants of the spook house. Tears flowed from Eva's eyes, and she was trembling. "Sorry to be so weak, Sir Arthur. I'm afraid we women aren't terribly good in these situations."
Sir Arthur shook his head. "On the contrary, you've shown extraordinary courage for anyone, man or woman," he said, taking her delicate white hands in his beefy ones.
I'm not ready to die," she confided.
There. It shall all be over soon, my dear, and we shall awaken in a far grander realm than this one."
"Do you truly believe that?"
"I believe with all my heart and soul. This shall be no more than the casting off of an old, worn coat one no longer needs."
"Please, hold me. I'm afraid." He welcomed her onto his knee and held her to his chest like a comforting grandfather.
Come, he said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "None of that."
A few seconds later, Eva passed out on his chest, looking as peaceful as a toddler taking a nap. The big Scot's lungs were powerful, and he remained conscious for a few more minutes.
"Whoever you are, you failed,"
he shouted to their unseen captor.
"You thought you would see us die like frightened rats, but we are unafraid. At our last moments, our minds are filled only with love. You will live on, a sad wretch twisted by hate. It is you who will die imprisoned, a prison of hatred and anger, one of your own making."
He stopped speaking and adjusted himself upright in the chair. One hand rested on Eva's curly mane, and the other on the table, as if striking a dignified pose for a photograph for the back of his latest book. A troop of fairies danced across the table before his eyes.
"How odd."
The master of the spook house waited a full minute before opening the door. Although more than a little unhinged, he was a cautious man. He entered wearing a gas mask, a pistol in hand. Sir Arthur and the woman might not be dead from the gas. Strangulation might be required to finish the exercise. It was not mustard gas, of course. Although it was exceedingly unlikely the burly mystery writer was feigning unconsciousness, every precaution was necessary. He walked into the room and nudged the author, who tumbled out of the chair, spilling Eva onto the floor. The master of the spook house looked under the table. There was no one under it. He stood erect, wonder filling him. He had snickered at Sir Arthur's ramblings about the supernatural, but now, what else might be real? God? Hell? But there was no time to waste speculating about metaphysics. He really was going to have to chase Houdini down. He turned back to the door. Houdini leapt from his perch above the door, where he braced himself against the ceiling, onto the masked man. The pair landed on the table and rolled over it onto the floor. The magician bashed the killer in the face repeatedly, and then tore the mask from him. Houdini clasped the mask to his own face and inhaled, breathing for the first time in 4 minutes. Their captor took advantage of this opportunity, shoving him off and bolting for the door. Houdini dived for his leg and caught him. The madman kicked him in the face and made it through the doorway, the escape artist stumbling out after him. Chapter 14. The Great Chase. When Sir Arthur opened his eyes, he found himself on the porch of the spook house, with Houdini, in his pants and undershirt now, hovering over him with concern.
"It seems our little piece of improvisational theatre worked, unless the other side is awfully like North America,"
the writer said, smiling weakly. Eva, already revived, hugged Sir Arthur. "We were so worried that you were too far gone."
"It is a bit of a disappointment to find myself still on this side of the Great Divide, but I suppose I shall have to muddle through,"
he said, sitting up and shaking off the residual effects of the gas. "We have Eva to thank," Houdini said. "It was Rabir Houdin's words that the only way out was if the captor opened the door that gave me the idea."
"A jolly good one," Conan Doyle said. "I suspect that particular solution to our dilemma would have eluded Holmes himself."
"Your performance was top, Sir Arthur. The London stage was denied a great actor when you took up writing. You had our host absolutely convinced I was gone." Houdini, whose small frame belied his tremendous strength, had dragged his companions to fresh air, first Eva, and then the big visitor from England.
"Our captor?"
"He escaped, made off in Eva's car, and I'm afraid he slashed the tires of our Model T." Houdini held up the gas mask. "He left this as a souvenir."
"Did you see his face?"
"A glimpse, but enough." Ever the showman, he paused for dramatic effect.
"Well?"
"Smalls."
"The old Negro? But why? And how?"
It was inconceivable that the uneducated handyman could possess the skills to have devised their fiendish prison, or the means to construct it. "He left another memento," Houdini replied. With his other hand he held up a dark brown rubber nose. Sir Arthur gasped.
"Good Lord!"
"A disguise?" said Eva.
"Along with grease paint and a false beard. Then Langdon was here all the time, under our noses."
"It was kind of dopey for me to leave him to guard the door, wasn't it?" Sir Arthur saw the pieces of the puzzle flying into place.
"His son told us that he was an amateur actor and put on plays at home."
I could kick myself. I've used disguises myself, to play the wild man in the circus when I was starting out. One time I dressed as an old man so I could heckle an imitator from the back of the theater. I should have seen through that disguise and that shuffling Uncle Tom routine. Conan Doyle, who worked closely with Gillette on the adaptation of his Holmes plays for the stage, also felt that he'd fallen down on the job.
"And I, who spent God knows how many hours in the back of the theatre, ought to have spotted it. By Jove, when they did my Brigadier Gerard story as a play, I raised hell because the soldiers coming back from the war had clean uniforms. If I'd taken a closer look at this simpleton, perhaps we would have been spared the recent unpleasantness."
Eva was on her feet. "We've got to catch him. I don't care for men who make me cry."
As I recall, the neighbours had a car in the front yard, a half-mile from here. We can borrow it, I'm quite sure."
"That old jalopy?" Houdini said doubtfully. "I'd be surprised if it doesn't explode when we try to crank it up."
"Still, beggars can't be choosers. Come, Houdini, I really do want to get my hands on that knave."
They tore down the road, Conan Doyle at the wheel of the neighbor's 1908 Model T. Eva sat beside him as Houdini buttoned his shirt in the back seat. "Where do you suppose he's headed?" Houdini said.
"I expect he's making for the train station in Wolsterton, and from there to Richmond, and God only knows where. There are trains leaving for New York every few hours."
This older Model T, with just 20 horsepower, was built for sturdiness and ease of repair, with greater concern for how fast it could be slapped together in the factory, about an hour and a half, than how fast it could go. Its top speed was about 45 miles per hour, making it no match for Eva's 100-horsepower Duesenberg. But by scarcely braking the car as it screeched around steep bends in the road, Conan Doyle whittled down their quarry's head start. "You handle this heap pretty well," remarked Houdini.
"I've done my fair share of driving in my day," the writer replied, smiling proudly. "I raced in the Prince Henry of Prussia Cup in 1911. It was 50 Germans against 50 Englishmen in a race from Hamburg to London. I drove a 16-horsepower Dietrich Lorraine I named Billy. The British team won handsomely, I might add. The race was supposed to promote goodwill between our nations."
"How did that work out?"
"Rather unsatisfactorily, I must admit."
When the car reached the Wolsterton train station, they spotted Eva's car in the street, sloppily parked with a wheel on the curb. A policeman stood next to it, frowning and writing a ticket. "We've got him!" Eva cried.
"Oh, no, we haven't," said Conan Doyle, pointing to a train departing the station.
They looked just in time to see the door to the caboose slide shut. "Floor it!" Houdini shouted. Conan Doyle mashed the accelerator and took off after the train. Waiting passengers and railway men at the station watched in astonishment as the rickety old Model T sped along beside the tracks. "We won't be able to catch it," Eva cried. "We don't need to catch it," Houdini said. "Just get me close." Conan Doyle looked ahead at the caboose and realized what his companion intended to do.
"Are you quite sure, old man? This isn't one of your movies, you know."
"I'm sure," said Houdini as he climbed through the rear window onto the roof. "Well, 90% sure." The older man gently exerted pressure on the accelerator until, going at top speed, the automobile caught up to the roaring train, trailing the caboose by just a few yards. Conan Doyle drew closer, closer, closer. Houdini knelt and reached for the railing. Then the car hit a bump. He lost his balance and nearly tumbled off.
"Blast it!" cried the author. "Dreadfully sorry about that, Harry."
He stepped on the gas, but the train was picking up speed too. They fell 2 yards behind the caboose, and then 3. "Well, it's now or never," Houdini said, rising to a crouch and keeping his balance on the roof of the car like a man on a surfboard. "Don't!" shrieked Eva, but the magician leaped and caught the railing with his left hand. The nimble escape artist hauled himself onto the platform at the back of the caboose. He waved triumphantly to Sir Arthur, who returned a respectful salute. The author meant to keep up with the train as best he could, but to his dismay the car began to slow down. The rusty old Model T sputtered and rolled to a stop near a farmhouse. A pair of horses looked up, momentarily interested, and then returned to munching hay. "What is it?" Eva cried.
"Of all the atrocious luck,"
moaned Conan Doyle, pointing to the fuel gauge.
"We're out of petrol."
He pounded his fist on the steering wheel as the train hurtled down the track. Running across the top of the train, Houdini was not a bit unnerved by the roaring wind and 70-mile-per-hour speed. His balance was superb. At age 11, his very first job in show business had been as Eric, Prince of the Air, a tightrope walker in a nickel-a-ticket sandlot circus in his boyhood hometown, Milwaukee. Once, when he and Bess were on the road with Welsh Brothers Circus, he'd done cartwheels on the roof of the train on a dare which earned them a steak dinner courtesy of Lance the Fire Eater. Still, it took considerable effort, fighting the wind, to reach the hatch that opened into the train car. The back door to the caboose, inconveniently, had been locked. He twisted the circular handle that secured the hatch, pried it open, and dropped into the car, landing with cat-like grace. The compartment was jam-packed with crates, steamer trunks, hat boxes, and animal cages, including an oversized one that housed a Great Dane almost the size of a pony. The lone occupant of the car had his back to Houdini, who crept slowly up behind him. The man was clad only in long johns, and had stuffed padding inside them to simulate a potbelly. The ragged overalls of the caretaker Smalls lay over a crate beside an open suitcase. The killer was in the process of attaching a large red beard to his face when the Great Dane began to bark furiously. The man turned around.
"You again, Harry. No one cried encore," he said in a familiar bass.
Houdini was stunned to see Bancroft, the newspaper reporter who had attended the séance. "Written any good stories lately?" Houdini asked. "I have a doozy for you about an escaped lunatic who collects corpses for a hobby." The disguised killer snickered.
"I was hoping to write your obituary,"
he said, continuing to adhere the beard with spirit gum. Houdini drew the madman's own pistol from his pocket. "I suppose I should have checked to see if there even was such a paper as the Richmond Courier and Gazette. Smalls, Bancroft, care to tell me who else you've been in our cast of characters? Were you Dr. Stratton who lured us into that death trap in the first place?"
Langdon laughed and pointed at him. "That would have been a really funny idea," he said, eerily maintaining Bancroft's booming voice. "Should have thought of it. But no, I only wrote poor Stratton the letter that got him to England looking for the man behind Sherlock Holmes, and the rest took care of itself. You were the most entertaining guest I ever had."
Houdini waved the gun at the killer. "I gotta hand it to you, Langdon. You're pretty clever for a fellow who's completely off his rocker. But what I want to know is how you got in and out of that booby hatch whenever you wanted."
"That will be my little secret for now,"
the other responded, casually leaning against a cage where the Great Dane barked and turned anxiously about in circles.
"I am very protective of my mysteries, just like you."
Houdini shook his head in disgust. "I'm not a bit like you. You crush the souls of people by trapping them in an inescapable place. I lift people's spirits by showing them a man can escape from any cage, just like your sick little box." He pointed the gun at the madman's head. "Now, if you don't mind, get down on your knees." Langdon stopped laughing.
"You didn't escape honestly, you know," he said petulantly. "You tricked your way out."
"I apologize. Honest, I do. Now, on your knees." Using the cage to brace himself, the killer slowly knelt.
"Would you really shoot me in cold blood?"
Houdini glanced around and saw a thick rope tied about a crate. It was just the thing he needed to tie Langdon up. "Kill you? No. You're either going to the electric chair or to a loony bin. But not a nice, pleasant joint like that sanitarium. A place for the criminally insane, where you can learn all about escape-proof rooms." Langdon laughed bitterly as Houdini made his way to the crate with the rope.
"An asylum. Oh, yes. Some more chats with a would-be fraud are just what I need."
Houdini kept the pistol trained at Langdon's head, while with the other hand he used his nimble fingers to untie the rope from the crate. "Drilling a hole in your cranium to let the bad thoughts out is more what I had in mind." The big dog was barking in excitement, leaping around, knowing something was wrong, even if it couldn't figure out what. Langdon shook his head.
"No, I think I'm going to take
an extended vacation. Canada, perhaps, or Venezuela." "This guy really is out of his mind," Houdini thought. "Doesn't he know he's licked?" With the rope in hand, Houdini approached the killer.
"As for you, I think I'm not inclined to tie you up or suspend you over a tub of acid. When I get that gun from you, pow!
Hope you don't mind if I gag you, the escape artist said. To be honest, you give me the heebie-jeebies. Just as Houdini reached the kneeling madman, however, Langdon opened the latch to the cage door, and the dog sprang out. The huge animal bowled Houdini over, and the pistol went flying. Langdon pounced on him, and once again the enemies were wrestling, trading blows as the rocking train rolled one man on top and then the other, while the dog bit the ankle that was closest at any given moment. They rose to their feet, staggering about in a bear hug, then came crashing down on the crate, splintering it. At last, Houdini landed a solid punch to the killer's jaw that left him temporarily stunned. He grabbed the lunatic by the nape of the neck and dragged him to the cage. There was a heavy iron padlock hanging on the door, but someone had neglected to use it to secure the latch. "You're a mad dog," Houdini said to the limp figure, whose head was lolling, "so I have just the place for you." But as he tried to throw him in, Langdon suddenly burst back to life. Surreptitiously, the fiend had picked up a piece of wood from the shattered crate, and now he whacked the magician in the face. As Houdini staggered from the blow, Langdon twisted the smaller man around and shoved him into the cage. He slammed the door and latched it. Then he locked the padlock. The Great Dane must not have liked this. It leaped at the maniac, rearing up to its full height and snapping at his face. Langdon hit it in the snout with the wood, and as it dropped, whimpering, proceeded to batter it repeatedly until he'd caved its skull in.
"Did I happen to tell you I'm not fond of dogs?" he said to his captive, punctuating each word with a blow. "Trapped, starved, beaten to a pulp, it's all the same to me. They're man's best friend, not mine."
Houdini reached for the lock, and Langdon rapped his hand with a stick. As the escape artist withdrew his smarting hand, the killer took the rope and began to wrap it around the cage, just as it had been tied around the crate. Houdini, crouching inside, guffawed as Langdon secured the cage with an elaborate knot. "You really have to get out to the picture shows more often," the performer shot. "Do you really think that Girl Scout knot can hold Houdini?" Langdon smiled, the phony red beard and wig giving him the appearance of a maniacal pirate. He unlocked the back door of the caboose and slid it open. A gust of wind hit Houdini's face, and he was blinded by dust. Langdon unlatched the railing, and it swung open.
"I'm a fanatic about the cinema, actually," the killer said blithely as he dragged the cage toward the door. "And if you are as well, you'll appreciate this trope."
Houdini blinked away the dust and saw the tracks behind the train vanishing into the distance. The train was making a bend around a precipice that looked to be nearly 90 feet. "It will take me about 8 minutes to get out of this flimsy thing," he boasted, striking the metal bar with his fist. Langdon grunted as he pushed the cage out of the rear door of the caboose. It teetered on the platform.
"Well, I'll suggest you pick up the pace, Harry, because the next train is in 6 minutes.
Langdon lay on his back and used both feet to kick the cage out. Houdini lurched forward, reached through the bars, and grabbed his adversary's right ankle. "You can have a ringside seat for my escape," he snarled. Langdon kicked himself free of the magician's hand and booted him in the face. As the magician rolled away, the killer gave the cage one last push, and it tumbled out of the train.